In the quiet, rolling hills of northern Illinois, the small town of Cedarville rested under a canopy of oaks and elms, their leaves rustling softly in the warm breeze of a late summer afternoon in 1860. It was here, on September 6th, that Jane Addams was born into a world of comfort and promise. Her family home, a sturdy brick house with white shutters and a wide porch, stood as a testament to her father's success. John H. Addams was a prosperous mill owner, a Quaker, and a state senator, a man whose presence commanded respect yet whose eyes held a gentle, thoughtful light. The household moved with the quiet rhythms of rural life, the clink of dishes in the kitchen, the murmur of political discussions in the parlor, and the soft footsteps of Jane, a delicate child with a curious gaze, who often sat by the window watching the world go by. The light filtered through lace curtains, casting dappled shadows on the wooden floor, and in those early years, the seeds of compassion were sown in the fertile soil of a loving family. Jane's childhood was marked by a deep bond with her father, a man who believed that privilege carried a duty to serve others. He would often take her on walks through the countryside, pointing out the mill where workers labored and the small homes of families who depended on fair wages. His voice, calm and steady, spoke of the Quaker ideals of equality and peace, and he taught her that true worth lay not in wealth, but in the integrity of one's actions. Yet, Jane's early life was not without struggle. A congenital spinal defect left her with a slight curvature, causing pain and self-consciousness. She spent many hours resting, reading books that opened windows to worlds beyond Cedarville. The scent of old paper and the feel of worn leather bindings became her companions. Her father's library, with its tall shelves and the soft glow of an oil lamp, was a sanctuary where she absorbed stories of heroism and reform, shaping a quiet determination that would one day move mountains. As Jane grew into a young woman, her health remained fragile, but her spirit grew stronger. She attended Rockford Female Seminary, where the halls echoed with the voices of young women debating philosophy and science. The architecture of the school, a blend of Gothic spires and sturdy limestone, seemed to reach toward the sky, mirroring the aspirations of its students. Here, Jane excelled, yet she felt a restlessness, a sense that her education must serve a purpose beyond personal accomplishment. The turning point came during a trip to Europe in her 20s, a journey meant to restore her health and broaden her horizons. In the autumn of 1883, she found herself in London, a city of stark contrasts where grand cathedrals cast shadows over narrow, grimy alleys. The air was thick with coal smoke, and the clatter of horse-drawn carriages mingled with the cries of street vendors. One evening, as dusk settled over the East End, Jane wandered into a district where poverty clung to every brick and cobblestone. She saw children with hollow eyes and bare feet, their clothes little more than rags, huddled in doorways. The sight of a rotting pile of vegetables being sold as food to desperate mothers struck her with a physical force. The stench, the dim gaslight flickering on wet streets, the hopelessness etched on faces, it was a world away from the serene prairies of Illinois. This was not just poverty. It was a systemic neglect that gnawed at her conscience. She later wrote of this moment as a revelation, a call to action that echoed her father's lessons. The seed planted that night would grow into a vision of a place where the privileged and the poor could live side by side, sharing knowledge and humanity. Returning home, Jane carried the weight of that London evening like a precious, painful stone. She studied the settlement house movement, particularly Toynbee Hall, where university men lived among the poor to offer education and fellowship. But Jane envisioned something more, a space led by women, addressing the needs of immigrants and workers in the bustling cities of America. The landscapes of her mind shifted from the quiet fields of Cedarville to the teeming neighborhoods of Chicago, where factories belched smoke and thousands of newcomers sought a foothold. Her health, though never robust, became a secondary concern. The fire of purpose burned brighter than any physical limitation. She began to speak with quiet conviction, her voice soft yet unwavering, sharing her dream with friends and allies. In the years that followed, Jane's path was not a straight line but a winding road through personal grief and societal expectation. She mourned her father's death deeply, feeling the loss of his guiding hand, yet his words remained a compass. The late 1880s found her traveling again, observing, learning, and gathering the threads of what would become her life's work. The architecture of her days was built on simple routines, writing letters by morning light, walking through city streets to understand the rhythms of working-class life, and sitting in quiet contemplation as the sun set. The shadows lengthened, but so did her resolve. Every encounter with suffering, every story of struggle, added a layer to the foundation she was laying. The girl who once watched the world from a window in Cedarville was now preparing to open a door for thousands. The autumn of 1889 arrived in Chicago with a crispness in the air and the smell of burning leaves drifting through the crowded streets of the near West Side. Amid the clamor of pushcarts and the babble of a dozen languages, a large, aging mansion stood at the corner of Halsted and Polk Streets. Its brick facade was weathered, its windows dusty, but its bones were strong, a relic of a more elegant era, now surrounded by the tenements and factories of the immigrant poor. This was the house built by Charles Hull, and it was here that Jane Addams and her friend Ellen Gates Starr would plant the seeds of a quiet revolution. They had searched for months, walking through neighborhoods where children played in garbage-strewn alleys and families crowded into airless rooms. When they saw the old Hull mansion, with its spacious rooms and forgotten garden, they saw not decay but possibility. The keys turned in the lock, and with a deep breath, they stepped inside. The floors creaked underfoot, and the light fell in long, dusty shafts through the tall windows, illuminating the first day of Hull House. The initial goal was simple yet profound, to create a place where educated women could live among the poor, not as missionaries imposing their ways, but as neighbors offering friendship and practical help. Jane believed that the barriers between classes could be softened through shared daily life, cooking meals together, caring for children, and simply listening. The first weeks were a flurry of scrubbing floors, repairing walls, and hanging simple curtains. The scent of fresh paint mixed with the aroma of coffee brewing in the kitchen, a welcoming signal to the community. Neighbors peered in curiously, some skeptical of these well-dressed women in their midst. But soon, the doors opened wide, and the house began to breathe with activity. A kindergarten was established in a sunlit room on the ground floor, where little ones, many of whom had never held a book, sat in a circle singing songs and learning letters. The sound of their laughter spilled out into the street, a new melody in a harsh environment. As winter settled over Chicago, bringing biting winds and soot-stained snow, Hull House became a warm refuge. Jane and her colleagues organized adult education classes in the evenings, teaching English to Italian, Polish, and Bohemian immigrants who toiled long hours in factories. The parlor, with its worn velvet chairs and flickering gas lamps, transformed into a classroom where men and women bent over primers, their rough hands tracing unfamiliar words. The atmosphere was one of patient encouragement. Mistakes were met with smiles, and every small success was celebrated. Beyond literacy, the house offered cultural nourishment, art exhibits, music recitals, and lectures on topics from Shakespeare to sanitation. Jane believed that beauty and knowledge were not luxuries, but necessities for a full life. The walls of Hull House soon displayed reproductions of great paintings, and a small stage hosted amateur theatricals that brought together people of all ages, their faces alight with the magic of storytelling. Practical support was woven into the fabric of daily operations. A health clinic, staffed by volunteer doctors and nurses, opened in a converted bedroom, offering care to those who could not afford it. Mothers brought their feverish babies, and the elderly came to have their aching joints tended. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and herbs, a clean, hopeful scent in a neighborhood where disease spread easily through cramped quarters. Jane also established a public kitchen, providing nutritious meals at low cost, and a daycare center for working mothers. The house's backyard, once a neglected plot, was turned into a playground where children could escape the dangerous streets. The first summer saw a garden blooming with vegetables and flowers, a patch of green and color that seemed to whisper of better times. Every program was a response to a need voiced by the community itself. Jane and her team listened intently, adapting their efforts to the rhythms of immigrant life. The inspiration for Hull House had come from Toynbee Hall in London, but Jane shaped it into something distinctly American and uniquely her own. Where Toynbee Hall was male-dominated and somewhat paternalistic, Hull House was led by women and emphasized collaboration over charity. Jane's vision was not to save the poor, but to work with them, recognizing their strengths and struggles. The daily life of the settlement was a tapestry of small, meaningful interactions, a shared cup of tea, a sewing circle where women exchanged stories, a young boy proudly showing off his drawing. The architecture of the house itself seemed to embrace this spirit. Its many rooms and hallways encouraged chance encounters, and its wide front porch became a gathering spot where neighbors could sit and talk on warm evenings. The light from the windows spilled out onto the sidewalk, a beacon of warmth in the harsh urban landscape. Yet, for all its successes, Hull House faced limitations rooted in the very society it sought to heal. Jane understood that the settlement could not single-handedly erase the systemic injustices of poverty, overcrowding, and exploitation. The house was a drop in a vast ocean of need. For every child in the kindergarten, dozens more roamed the streets. Jane often reflected on this tension, the joy of small victories tempered by the enormity of the task. She saw that true change required not only service, but also advocacy, a realization that would later propel her into broader reform. But in those early years, the focus remained on building trust and community, brick by brick, person by person. The legacy of Hull House was not just in its programs, but in its philosophy, that democracy must be lived in neighborhoods, through face-to-face relationships, and that every human being deserves dignity and opportunity. As the years passed, the mansion grew into a complex of buildings, a hub of hope that would inspire a national movement, its roots forever anchored in that first autumn when two women unlocked a door and let the world in. Imagine a crisp autumn morning in Chicago's near West Side, around 1895. The smell of baking bread drifts from a tenement window, mingling with the distant clatter of horse-drawn wagons on cobblestone. Sunlight filters through a haze of coal smoke, casting long shadows across the crowded streets where children in patched clothing play between pushcarts. This was the daily reality of the immigrant neighborhoods surrounding Hull House, a reality that Jane Addams and her colleagues were determined to transform not just through direct service, but by changing the very systems that perpetuated poverty. From its humble beginnings, Hull House quickly evolved into a laboratory for social reform. Addams and the other residents, mostly educated women, lived among the community, observing firsthand the brutal working conditions, the squalid housing, and the lack of basic sanitation. They understood that the kindergarten classes and social clubs they offered were only a starting point. To create lasting change, they needed to address the root causes of suffering. This meant stepping beyond the settlement's doors and into the realm of public policy, armed with meticulous research and a deep moral conviction. One of the most pressing issues was child labor. Walking through the neighborhood, Addams saw children as young as 6 or 7 toiling in factories, their small hands suited for dangerous machinery, their futures stolen before they began. Hull House became a hub for gathering data on working children, documenting the long hours, the paltry wages, and the physical toll. Addams and her ally, the formidable reformer Florence Kelley, used this evidence to lobby state legislators. Kelley, who lived at Hull House and served as Illinois' first factory inspector, brought legal expertise and relentless energy. Together, they pushed for the Illinois Factory Act of 1893, which limited working hours for women and children and mandated factory inspections, a landmark victory that inspired similar laws across the nation. Sanitation and public health were equally urgent. In the densely packed tenements, garbage piled up in alleys, privies overflowed, and clean water was scarce. Disease spread rapidly, claiming the lives of infants and the elderly. Addams, ever practical, took on the role of garbage inspector for her ward, a volunteer position she performed with characteristic dedication. She rose before dawn to follow the collection carts, ensuring that refuse was properly removed and that streets were swept. Her efforts led to improved municipal services and a significant drop in the ward's death rate. This hands-on approach demonstrated a core principle. Reform was not an abstract ideal, but a daily, gritty commitment to human dignity. Housing reform became another cornerstone of Hull House's mission. The settlement's detailed maps and surveys revealed the appalling conditions inside tenements: windowless rooms, leaking roofs, and rampant overcrowding. Addams and her colleagues published these findings, stirring public outrage and pressuring city officials to enforce building codes. They advocated for model tenements and green spaces, believing that a decent home was fundamental to a healthy life. Their work contributed to the broader progressive era push for urban renewal, showing that even the poorest neighborhoods could be places of beauty and safety if given proper attention. At the heart of all these efforts was the settlement movement's philosophy of neighborly cooperation. Addams never positioned herself as a superior dispensing charity. She saw herself as a neighbor sharing in the struggles and joys of the community. This ethos attracted a network of brilliant reformers to Hull House, including Dr. Alice Hamilton, who pioneered the study of occupational diseases, and Julia Lathrop, who later headed the U.S. Children's Bureau. Together, they formed a powerful intellectual and activist community, their collective work weaving a safety net of social protections that had never before existed in America. Yet for all its achievements, the settlement movement had its limitations. While Addams championed cultural pluralism, Hull House's programs sometimes reflected a paternalistic aim to Americanize immigrants, subtly devaluing their native traditions. This tension between respecting diversity and promoting assimilation was a contradiction Addams herself grappled with, and it reminds us that even the most progressive movements can carry the blind spots of their era. Nevertheless, the tangible improvements in community welfare were undeniable. By the turn of the century, Hull House had helped secure safer streets, fairer labor laws, and a new understanding that society had a collective responsibility for its most vulnerable members. Imagine the bustling streets of early 20th century Chicago, where the clatter of horse-drawn carriages mingled with the distant hum of industry. In a quiet room within Hull House, the settlement she co-founded, Jane Addams sat at a wooden desk, the afternoon light filtering through lace curtains. The air was filled with the scent of old books and fresh coffee. Here, surrounded by the community she served, Addams was not only a reformer, but also a burgeoning voice for women's rights and international peace. Her hands, once accustomed to the comforts of a privileged upbringing, now tirelessly penned letters and speeches advocating for a more just world. The walls of Hull House bore witness to her transformation from a local activist to a national figure, as she began to see the interconnectedness of social justice, gender equality, and global harmony. Addams' journey into the women's suffrage movement was a natural extension of her work at Hull House. She observed firsthand how disenfranchisement left women, especially immigrant and working-class mothers, powerless to address the squalid conditions they endured. In the settlement's meeting halls, she hosted gatherings where women shared stories of hardship and hope, their voices rising in unison. Addams argued that the vote was not merely a political right, but a practical tool for social housekeeping, a way for women to influence sanitation, education, and child welfare. She spoke at rallies across Illinois, her calm yet resolute demeanor captivating audiences. Her approach was inclusive, linking suffrage to broader reforms like factory safety and public health. By framing voting as a means to protect families, she bridged the gap between traditional domestic roles and the burgeoning feminist movement, making the cause accessible to many who had never considered it. As the 20th century unfolded, Addams' vision expanded beyond national borders. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 shattered the peace of a generation, and she felt a profound moral calling to oppose the conflict. In 1915, she helped found the Women's Peace Party and later became the president of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, a role that would define much of her later life. The League's headquarters, often a modest rented space in Geneva, bustled with women from diverse nations, their languages blending into a symphony of shared purpose. Addams believed that the same principles of cooperation and mutual understanding she applied at Hull House could be scaled to international relations. She tirelessly promoted diplomacy, arbitration, and the idea that war was a preventable failure of human ingenuity. Her writings from this period, including the influential book Newer Ideals of Peace, laid out a constructive vision for a world order based on social justice rather than military might. During these years, Addams traveled extensively, her journeys a stark contrast to the settled life of Hull House. On a transatlantic voyage in 1915, she attended the International Congress of Women at The Hague, where delegates from both warring and neutral nations gathered. The Congress was a testament to her belief in dialogue. Women debated resolutions for continuous mediation, their discussions illuminated by the soft glow of chandeliers in the Grand Hall. Addams' leadership was marked by a quiet strength. She listened intently, her eyes reflecting a deep empathy, before offering words that sought common ground. She met with world leaders, including President Woodrow Wilson, urging him to mediate peace. While these efforts did not stop the war, they established a precedent for citizen diplomacy. Her work emphasized that peace was not a passive state but an active, ongoing process requiring the same dedication as any social reform. However, Addams' pacifist stance during World War I came with significant personal cost. As the United States entered the war in 1917, her unwavering opposition to violence drew fierce criticism. Newspapers labeled her unpatriotic. Former allies distanced themselves. Her public speaking engagements dwindled. Yet, even in this period of isolation, she remained committed to humanitarian relief. She worked with the American Friends Service Committee to provide food and medical aid to war-torn regions, a practical demonstration of her principles. The quiet of Hull House became a refuge where she continued to write and reflect. It is important to note a limitation in her approach. Her pacifism, rooted in a universalist ethic, sometimes underappreciated the complexities of national security and the legitimate defense of sovereignty that many felt. Nevertheless, her consistency in valuing human life over political expediency offered a powerful counter-narrative to the prevailing militarism. In the post-war years, Addams redoubled her efforts, and the public gradually recognized the depth of her commitment. The Women's International League for Peace and Freedom grew, establishing branches worldwide and advocating for disarmament and the rights of minorities. Addams presided over congresses in cities like Vienna and Dublin, where the scars of war were still visible in the architecture and the faces of the people. She witnessed the slow, painstaking work of rebuilding, and her speeches often drew parallels between healing individuals and healing nations. Her daily life remained grounded in Hull House, where she would return to find solace in the simple routines, the smell of bread baking in the communal kitchen, the laughter of children in the courtyard. This balance between global advocacy and local engagement was the cornerstone of her philosophy, showing that peace begins with the neighborly bonds forged in everyday life. As twilight settled over her long career, Addams' contributions were internationally celebrated. In 1931, she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, a recognition not just of her anti-war activism, but of a lifetime dedicated to the constructive betterment of society. The news reached her in a hospital room, where she was recovering from illness, the soft beeping of medical equipment a stark contrast to the tumultuous world she sought to calm. True to her character, she donated the prize money to the Women's International League. Her legacy in championing women's rights and peace is a lesson in the power of empathetic action. She taught that lasting change comes not from grand gestures alone, but from the steady accumulation of small, deliberate acts, a conversation over coffee, a letter to a leader, a vote cast for dignity. In the quiet moments of reflection, we can still hear her message, that the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice only when we actively and peacefully pull it. In the waning light of an autumn evening in 1914, the streets of Chicago lay quiet beneath a canopy of amber leaves. Inside Hull House, the windows glowed softly, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors. Jane Addams sat at her desk, pen in hand, the weight of the world pressing upon her shoulders. The Great War had erupted in Europe, and its echoes reached even here, into the heart of the immigrant neighborhood she had served for decades. She could hear the distant murmur of voices from the common room, women speaking in hushed tones, their faces etched with worry for relatives across the sea. The air was thick with the scent of old books and the faint aroma of coffee, a small comfort in uncertain times. Addams had long believed that war was the ultimate failure of human compassion. Her pacifism was not passive, it was a fierce, active commitment to the idea that disputes could be settled through reason and empathy. As the war intensified, she spoke out with unwavering clarity, urging the United States to remain neutral and to mediate peace. She traveled to international conferences, meeting with women from both sides of the conflict, seeking common ground. But her words were met with growing hostility at home. Newspapers that once praised her now labeled her a traitor. Former supporters turned away, and Hull House, once a beacon of hope, became a target of suspicion. The very community she had nurtured now felt the sting of a nation rallying for war. The criticism was deeply personal. Addams was called unpatriotic, her character assailed in public forums. Donations to Hull House dwindled, and her influence in political circles evaporated. Yet, in the face of this storm, she did not retreat. Each morning, she rose before dawn, the cool Chicago air bracing her resolve. She continued her work at Hull House, ensuring that the daycare center opened on time, that the visiting nurses reached the sick, and that the evening classes offered a respite from the world's turmoil. The building itself, with its sturdy brick facade and ivy-covered walls, stood as a testament to endurance. Inside, the rhythm of daily life persisted, the clatter of dishes in the communal kitchen, the laughter of children in the courtyard, the quiet rustle of pages in the library. Addams channeled her energy into humanitarian relief, focusing on the practical needs of those affected by the war. She organized food drives for starving civilians in Europe, coordinated with the Red Cross, and advocated for the rights of conscientious objectors. Her office became a hub of activity, maps and letters strewn across her desk, the telephone ringing with urgent requests. She worked late into the night, the gas lamp flickering as she penned letters to government officials, pleading for compassion. Though her public standing had diminished, the gratitude of those she helped was a quiet, sustaining force. She found solace in small moments, a mother's relieved smile, a child's drawing pin to the wall, the warm handshake of a returning soldier who remembered her kindness. As the war dragged on, Addams witnessed the profound suffering it caused, the broken bodies, the shattered minds, the families torn apart. Her pacifism deepened, rooted now in the visceral reality of loss. She began to document her experiences and reflections, writing with a clarity that would later resonate in her book, Peace and Bread in Time of War. The act of writing was itself a form of resilience, a way to make sense of the senseless. In the quiet of her study, surrounded by shelves of worn volumes, she crafted arguments for a new international order, one based on cooperation rather than conquest. Her words were seeds planted in barren soil, waiting for a more receptive season. When the armistice finally came in 1918, the world exhaled, but Addams knew that true peace required more than a ceasefire. She continued her advocacy, speaking out against the punitive terms of the Treaty of Versailles and warning of future conflicts. Slowly, the public's perception began to shift. The same steadfastness that had earned her scorn now commanded a grudging respect. In the 1920s, as the fervor of wartime patriotism faded, her humanitarian work came back into focus. Hull House regained its footing, and Addams was once again invited to advise on social policy. The lessons of her resilience were clear: integrity need not be allowed to be powerful, and service to humanity transcends the tides of popular opinion. By the end of the decade, Addams stood in the courtyard of Hull House on a spring morning, the sun warming the red brick and the scent of lilacs drifting from the garden. She watched a group of young women, immigrants' daughters, practicing a dance for a cultural festival. Their laughter rose like a hymn to everything she had fought for. In that moment, the years of controversy seemed a distant storm, and the enduring work of community, the daily acts of care and connection, shone with a quiet, unassailable light. On a crisp December morning in 1931, the streets of Oslo lay blanketed in snow, the air still and cold. Inside a grand hall, the warm glow of chandeliers illuminated rows of dignitaries in formal attire. Jane Addams, now 71 and in frail health, was unable to make the journey from Chicago. Instead, the Nobel Peace Prize was accepted on her behalf, a moment that rippled across the Atlantic to her quiet room at Hull House. There, surrounded by the familiar comforts of her lifelong home, the worn armchair, the bookshelves crowded with memories, she received the news with characteristic humility. The prize was not just for her peace activism, but for a lifetime of weaving social justice into the fabric of everyday life. The honor recognized what she had always believed, that the work of building community is, in itself, an act of peace. The Nobel Committee lauded Addams for her unwavering commitment to international arbitration and her leadership in the women's peace movement. As president of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, she had crisscrossed the globe, meeting with world leaders and ordinary citizens alike, always advocating for dialogue over destruction. Her approach was rooted in the settlement house philosophy, that understanding begins face-to-face, in the shared spaces of daily life. The prize money, a substantial sum, was immediately directed to the League, a final gesture of her lifelong dedication to service over self. In the halls of Hull House, the staff and neighbors gathered to celebrate, their joy a testament to the deep roots she had planted in Chicago's soil. Hull House itself had grown from a single mansion into a complex of 13 buildings, a city block dedicated to human flourishing. Its impact was immeasurable. Thousands of immigrants had learned English there, found employment, and accessed healthcare. The settlement's model had inspired similar houses across the country, sparking a movement that professionalized social work and influenced national policy. Addams' writings, from 20 years at Hull House to Newer Ideals of Peace, articulated a vision of democracy that extended beyond the ballot box to the very streets and kitchens where people lived. Her words were not mere theory, they were blueprints drawn from the messy, beautiful reality of community life. Yet, for all her achievements, Addams was not without her limitations. Her pacifism, while principled, sometimes underestimated the complexities of global power dynamics and the deep-seated causes of conflict. Critics argued that her approach could be overly idealistic, failing to fully account for the intractable nature of certain political evils. However, this limitation does not diminish the constructive power of her example. Instead, it highlights the enduring challenge she posed, to persistently seek peaceful solutions even when they seem inadequate, to hold fast to empathy in the face of cynicism. Her legacy is not one of perfection, but of persistent, courageous effort. In the years following her Nobel Prize, Addams' health declined, but her spirit remained a guiding light. She continued to write and advise, her voice a gentle but firm call to conscience. When she passed away in 1935, the nation mourned a woman who had been called the most dangerous woman in America just 2 decades earlier. Her funeral was held in the courtyard of Hull House, the same courtyard where children had played and festivals had celebrated the rich cultures of the neighborhood. The brick walls, draped in ivy, stood as silent witnesses to a life poured out in service. The legacy she left was not in monuments of stone, but in the living tradition of empathy and engagement she had fostered. Today, the lessons of Jane Addams resonate with renewed urgency. In a world still fractured by conflict and inequality, her model of civic engagement, grounded in listening, in the patient work of building bridges across difference, offers a path forward. Her writings remind us that peace is not a distant ideal, but a practice woven into the mundane, the fair treatment of a worker, the welcoming of a stranger, the education of a child. Hull House may no longer stand as it once did, but its spirit endures in the countless community organizations, social work programs, and peace initiatives that trace their lineage to her vision. The warm cinematic light of her life illuminates the ordinary heroism of caring for one another. As dusk settles over the memory of Hull House, we can imagine Jane Addams in her study, the soft lamplight pooling on her desk. Outside the window, the city hums with the sounds of a new generation, facing its own trials. But the principles she embodied, empathy, resilience, and the unwavering belief in the possibility of a more just world remain as vital as ever. Her story is a quiet invitation, a reminder that history's most profound changes often begin not with grand gestures, but with a single, compassionate act in the heart of a community.